Welcome to Undercurrents, our daily news show from Unheard's Washington Bureau. Make sure to subscribe here on the YouTube channel, wherever you download your podcasts, and of course over at undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience of the show. It has been an absolutely insane news day with people running around back and forth in Washington, especially on Capitol Hill, where nearly half a dozen Trump nominees are sitting before their Senate confirmation hearings. That includes some really high profile potential members of Donald Trump's cabinet. Senator Marco Rubio, Donald Trump's pick for Secretary of State, is one of those people who's sitting for confirmation hearings. And you have Pam Bondi, who we're going to focus on in this video, Trump's pick to lead the DOJ. Also, Sean Duffy, picked for Department of Transportation, John Ratcliffe, picked for head of CIA, and Russ Vought, who is Donald Trump's pick for the Office of Management and Budget, which Vought led under Trump's first administration. I want to show everyone these side-by-side images of Senator Rick Scott, Republican of Florida. Take a look here, and if you're listening, I'll just explain briefly. What you see side-by-side is a picture of Rick Scott at the Pam Bondi hearing asking a question, and then Senator Rick Scott, 10:06 a.m., so 6 minutes after the first picture, asking questions at Senator Marco Rubio's confirmation hearing. That's just the kind of day it's been here in Washington, D.C. as we await Joe Biden's Oval Office farewell address, and news of a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel is breaking throughout the day. So absolutely wild stuff. Before we get into Pam Bondi, most of the rest of these hearings have been kind of business as usual. There haven't been the same types of exchanges at most of them, for the most part, that we saw with Pete Hegseth yesterday. There was a pretty contentious exchange between Russ Vought, and in this case, actually, there were a decent amount of contentious exchanges in the Vought hearing. Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat of Connecticut. And, while we want to focus on Pam Bondi, I think having flipped through all of these confirmation hearings over the course of the day, the Vought one is the only other one that made a ton of headlines or is going to likely make a lot more sort of noise, as opposed to the other business as usual. A lot of these people were members of Congress before, including Rubio, Duffy, and Ratcliffe, so there's a level of comfortability there. Here's Russ Vought, someone who was close to the Heritage Foundation, has been affiliated with Project 2025 or been associated with Project 2025 by Democrats, somebody who's really, really a hardcore kind of intellectual architect of MAGA. You can understand why Democrats went really hard in on Russ Vought. So here's his exchange with Blumenthal.
Do you believe there should be a means test for disability benefits going to veterans?
Again, I'm not going to speak to the.
So you're not going to answer that question, but you have in the past taken the position there should be a means test.
Now to Pam Bondi, who did a pretty good job remaining calm and collected over the course of her hearing. But we talked about this here on the channel when Matt Gaetz was initially nominated to be the head of the Department of Justice. There's basically no more important position in the Trump administration than heading up the Department of Justice, which, by the way, is why Trump threw the wildest of wild cards, Matt Gaetz, who, above all ideological loyalties, is loyal to Donald Trump. He's Trump is sort of Matt Gaetz's ideological North Star. Pam Bondi is somebody who's worked as a lobbyist, who's kind of been around politics for a while, but is also really close to Donald Trump. So it's sort of a blend of more establishment Republican Party baggage, but also ideological Florida-based Trump loyalty. It's an interesting blend. It's sort of like Susie Wiles herself, Donald Trump's incoming chief of staff, who was a top position in his campaign. So Pam Bondi, at the head of the Department of Justice, would be a reformer. That's what Donald Trump wants. That's what Kash Patel, who is Trump's pick to head the FBI, wants to see at the Department of Justice over the FBI, and has said in very dramatic ways he intends to bring to the FBI, and Pam Bondi would be overseeing Kash Patel, obviously. So you can imagine why Democrats were eager to press Bondi, who is, of course, less of a wild card than Pete Hegseth. I don't want to open up that can of worms. Obviously, Pete Hegseth would come straight from Fox News to the Pentagon. He has some experience. Talked about this yesterday. You can go watch that video. Leading other organizations. He's a decorated veteran. Pam Bondi's just a bit more conventional as a pick. somebody who's worked as a state attorney general, who's been around these political circles, rubbing elbows with all the right people for a long time, and sort of projects or sort of presents herself, we'll say, as a more conventional pick, even if that packaging is, what you would see it within that packaging ideologically is a little bit different than most conventional Washington lawmakers and regulators. So let's dive into some of what I thought were the most important clips. This is one that I think, too, let's say, that I think were tough for Pam Bondi. They're tough for any Trump nominee. But let's just start with these. This is Dick Durbin asking Pam Bondi about the 2020 election.
Are you prepared to say today under oath without reservation that Donald Trump lost the presidential contest to Joe Biden in 2020?
Ranking Member Durbin, President Biden is the President of the United States. He was duly sworn in, and he is the President of the United States. There was a peaceful transition of power.
Okay, this is Senator Mazie Hirono, who I don't think ever covers herself in glory throughout the course of these hearings, also asking Pam Bondi a similar question about the 2020 presidential election.
Who won the 2020 presidential election?
Joe Biden is the President of the United States.
Ms. Bondi, you know that there is a difference between acknowledging it and, I can say that Donald Trump won the 2024 election. I may not like it, but I can say it. You cannot say who won the 2020 presidential election. Okay. It's disturbing that you can't give voice to that fact.
Now, here is Senator Chris Coons, a Democrat from Delaware, asking Pam Bondi what I think, by the way, even if it's not the likeliest outcome of a second Trump administration, is fine as a question. And it's something that, like, you never say never with Donald Trump, even though it's not my biggest concern about him. I think it's a fair question. So here's him asking about a potential Trump third term to Pam Bondi.
President-elect Trump eligible to run for another term as president in 2028?
No, Senator, not unless they change the Constitution.
Thank you.
I think Pam Bondi handled those questions as best she could as a nominee for Donald Trump. Obviously, we all know at this point we're about a decade in to Trump's political career. He values loyalty. And so breaking with Donald Trump, even if you privately think, of course, Joe Biden won the 2020 election, Mark Zuckerberg, maybe you're Pam Bondi, and you think Mark Zuckerberg was, doing this sort of partisan operation to boost voter turnout, even if you have those kinds of concerns, that's not the answer that you exactly have to give. And so you can take that for what it is. Kind of leads us to why Pam Bondi and Adam Schiff. Adam Schiff was a chief architect of the Russia collusion hoax, who has now been elected senator from California. He was a member of the House at the time. So you can imagine that Adam Schiff had a lot of tough, pointed questions for Pam Bondi. And what she did here was flip the script on Adam Schiff in a way that was a total win for Bondi and a total loss for Schiff. He's one of MAGA's favorite kind of political punching bags, and honestly, for good reason, because those clips of him from the early days of Russiagate have aged incredibly poorly. He was spreading information that turned out to be very misleading, and somehow, of course, was still elected to the Senate in deep blue California. But let's watch Pam Bondi get in a great jab at Adam Schiff here.
Will it be your advice to the president? No, Mr. President, I need to go over them on a case-by-case basis. Do not issue blanket pardons. Will that be your advice to the president?
Senator, I have not looked at any of those files. If confirmed, I will look at the files
And
for
will
the
you be able to
pardons, as well
will
as
you
the
be able to
ongoing
review
investigation.
hundreds of cases on day one?
I will look at every file I am
Of course
asked
you
to
won't.
look
So
at.
will you advise the
Hey,
president?
can I
will
answer
you-
the question?
Well, my question
I
is-
would have plenty of staff. You said, of course you want.
You'll be able to review
Listen, I'm
hundreds
not
of
going to
cases on the first day?
mislead this body nor you.
All right, let me ask another question. You don't want to answer that. Let me ask
You were
another question.
censured by
It will
Congress,
also-
Senator, for
it will
comments just
also-
like this that
it
are
will
so
also-
reckless.
Okay, now let's watch Pam Bondi try to flip the script a little bit on Adam Schiff, who was asking her about potential investigations into Liz Cheney.
I'm asking you, sitting here today, whether you are aware of a factual predicate to investigate Liz Cheney.
Senator, no one
Based
has
on what
asked
you
me
know.
to investigate Liz Cheney. That is a
The president has
hypothetical.
called for it publicly. You are aware of that, aren't you?
No one has asked me to investigate.
But the president
Liz.
has
We're
called-
also
the
worried about
president-
Liz Cheney,
the
Senator.
president has
You know what
called
we
for
should
this-
be worried about?
Ms. Bondi,
The
please
crime rate
answer
in
my
California
questions.
right now
You
is
are
through
aware,
the roof.
Ms. Bondi,
Your
my-
robberies
Ms.
are
Bondi,
87%
my
higher
question-
than the national
my question
average.
is this.
That's what I
My
want to
question
be
is
focused
this.
on,
Do
Senator.
you have the
if I'm
power to
confirmed
say
as
no to the
Attorney
president?
General.
So these are very related to one of the more interesting exchanges, and more substantively interesting exchanges that Pam Bondi had with Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse wanted to ask Pam Bondi about the political targeting of allies. This is why you see Democrats bringing up Liz Cheney, for example, which, by the way, Biden has reportedly been pressured to mull potential preemptive pardons for Liz Cheney and Adam Schiff and other people that Trump would potentially prosecute via Pam Bondi. Pam Bondi had a great answer to Sheldon Whitehouse on this question.
It would not be appropriate for a prosecutor to start with a name and look for a crime. It's a prosecutor's job to start with a crime and look for a name, correct?
Senator, I think that is the whole problem with the weaponization that we have seen the last 4 years and what's been happening to Donald Trump. They targeted Donald Trump. They went after him, actually starting back in 2016. They targeted his campaign. They have launched countless investigations against him. That will not be the case if I am Attorney General. I will not politicize that office. I will not target people simply because of their political affiliation. Justice will be administered even-handedly.
And now here's an exchange that went a little bit less well for Pam Bondi with Sheldon Whitehouse on Kash Patel's alleged enemies list.
Yes.
Would you
Senator.
have hired someone into the Florida Attorney General's office who you knew had an enemies list?
Senator, to cut to the chase, you're clearly talking about Kash Patel. I don't believe he has an enemies list. He made a quote on TV, which I have not heard. I saw your sign, or Senator Durbin's sign, about Kash. But I know that Kash Patel has had 60 jury trials as a public defender, as a prosecutor. He has great experience in the Intel Department, Department of Defense. I have known Kash, and I believe that Kash is the right person at this time for this job. You'll have the ability to question Mr. Patel.
And I'm
when-
questioning you
when
right
you
now
do.
about whether you will enforce an enemies list that he announced publicly on television.
Oh, Senator, I'm sorry. There will never be an enemies list within the Department of Justice.
So what's somewhat amusing about that is most Republicans, and honestly, probably most people who voted for Donald Trump, don't have any issue whatsoever with Kash Patel coming into the FBI if he's confirmed with an enemies list. Now, Pam Bondi, again, had a lot of very substantive exchanges. I don't know if the Democrats watched our video yesterday. I mean, I can guess they didn't. But about Pete Hegseth, where there was a lot of breathless defense and hysteria over our precious institutions that are no longer trusted, respected, popular with the American public. I thought that was a tactical mistake. I think it reflects substantive mistakes, ideological limits in the Democratic Party, but Democrats toned that down a bit today. There were some exchanges. Obviously, this White House one is a good one. Schiff is a good one. Mazie Hirono is a good one. But there were a lot of substantive back and forth issues on policies, like with Senator Cory Booker about drugs, and on antitrust with Senator Amy Klobuchar. I thought Democrats did a good job, like sort of narrowing their questions a bit more than they did in the Hegseth, the Hegseth hearing. I don't know if that was intentional or if it just sort of reflects the priorities of the senators on the Judiciary Committee in a way that's different from Armed Services Committee, but they're an incredible hole. Democrats on the Judiciary Committee, hopefully they realize they're in an incredible hole with the public. It doesn't mean they have to think the public is right not to trust these institutions, but the very, very least they can do is acknowledge that the public doesn't trust these institutions. And that could mean, of course, turning things around and saying it's all Republicans' fault that nobody trusts the FBI and the DOJ. But Pam Bondi is coming in enthusiastically and confidently because she has the upper hand. She has, when it comes to who was over the last, few administrations really targeting political enemies, from the Obama administration to the Trump administration, things that were happening by his own people, James Comey when he still served under Donald Trump. That is something that Pam Bondi can come in and have these well-crafted, pitch-perfect answers that will land well with the public about saying, I'm not targeting political enemies. I just want to restore order. I want to restore the rule of law to the DOJ. And when you say that, Democrats just hit a brick wall because she's right. I mean, that's makes sense. Now, whether she has the credibility or whether she has the intentions of fulfilling that stated goal, when the president has talked about going after Liz Cheney, and there actually may be some legal pathways, there may be some legitimate ones and some illegitimate ones, but whatever that is, Pam Bondi is saying, listen, I might target the targeters, investigate the investigators, as she said in an exchange with Senator Josh Hawley. And then the question becomes, can we pull ourselves from the doom spiral? And Pam Bondi was there with a smiling face to suggest that she can pull people from the doom spiral, essentially. We did a full interview with Matthew Meehan of Hillsdale College on that question a couple of weeks ago that I really recommend checking out. I think it's been circulating among some people who might, end up working for the DOJ under Trump. I don't know particularly, but that's my guess. And that matters. That matters a lot, because that's sort of when you see Pam Bondi smiling through answers that sound perfectly legitimate about restoring the rule of law to the Department of Justice, and Democrats not really having a credible response to that. It's not a good knock on Pam Bondi to say, well, you investigate your political enemies, when she would be investigating political enemies who were investigating their political enemies. Is just not a credible hit. And what could be lurking beneath the surface there, obviously, is an exacerbation of the doom spiral. So what Pam Bondi, the mission she has ahead of her, is not exacerbating the doom spiral. If that's something she doesn't want to exacerbate, we don't. I imagine Pam Bondi doesn't want to be remembered as somebody in the history books, if they were fairly written, as somebody who was a partisan hack. We know history books aren't fairly written for the most part. Well, I shouldn't say for the most part, but in many cases. So she may not have a choice, but she is coming in, like many Trump nominees, saying the public finally agrees with us. We're finally able to penetrate the public consciousness on some of these issues that only conservative media was talking about, and we're right on some of them. And the DOJ is one where they are right. She's careening to confirmation. Rubio looks like he's careening to confirmation. There's still some wild cards. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Tulsi Gabbard. What happens with Pete Hegseth is a little bit up in the air, but it looks like he's also going to be confirmed. So we're heading into a Trump administration with recent Fox News host as the head of the Pentagon, with Pam Bondi as the head of the DOJ, somebody who is a total Trump loyalist and may oversee Kash Patel, and Senator Marco Rubio in their positions. Republicans, I don't know if this was intentional, but doing all of these simultaneously was a total blitz on the media. I think strategically it allows certain problems to get lost. If there are any, so like any PR problems, it kind of all gets lost in a big jumble of hearings. Again, I don't know if that was intentional, but if it was, you're probably burying some exchanges that, if the confirmation hearing had been on its own individual day, might have gotten more oxygen in the news cycle. But Pam Bondi did exactly what she needed to do today, and that is great news if you're Donald Trump and if you're somebody who supports the Trump administration, because she is in the position in which Donald Trump is going to want to probably do some of the most immediate work when he takes office on Monday. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are going to be here covering all of it, so make sure to subscribe on the channel, wherever you download your podcasts, and over at undercurrents.tv. We'll be back soon with more.